And to continue talking about this day and following the results, we welcome Danny Shaw, Professor of International Studies at the Public University of New York. Hello, Danny. Welcome to our special program. Danny, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. How you doing?
I find Danny here celebrating alongside our Venezuelan compatriot the landslide victory that they reached in this referendum. Danny, to begin our exchange here, our conversation in this special program, how do you describe, how do you see the developing, the holding of this referendum, and now that we know the results, what they represent?
This is an important demonstration of Venezuelan unity before the ongoing hostility of the U.S. government and of private capital that wants a slice of this extremely rich Essequiba region. The Venezuelan people and their Bolivarian leadership do not have any beef with their neighbors in Guyana. Their beef is with ExxonMobil and these corporations who for decades now and centuries have sought to divide and conquer in order to control one of the most mineral rich and gas and oil rich regions in the entire world, and that is South America. So to see this resounding show of unity is certainly significant. I think we have to contextualize this latest U.S. proxy. It's not a proxy war, but certainly it's a proxy informational war using Guyana. We have to contextualize it because Brazil has gone left last year with the victory of Lula over Bolsonaro and over fascism. And look at Colombia. Colombia has historically been the largest U.S. base in the region, more than 9 U.S. bases in Colombia. And they haven't been able to weaponize Colombia and Brazil in the same way. So now they're trying to weaponize Guyana.
Danny, seeing the will of the Venezuelan people that came out peacefully to vote, and as you were saying, the discourse from the Guyana side, they have played the part of a victim that they feel they're going to be invaded, they're going to be attacked by Venezuela. But this has been a stance that has been clearly defended by the Venezuelan authorities that the situation, the dispute has to be resolved through the 1966 Geneva Agreement, only through dialogue and negotiations to settle this peacefully. There's never been an expression of aggression against Guyana. So what is the intention of Guyana acting as the victim in this role?
That's because Laura Richardson and the U.S. Southern Command, as well as the Germans and the imperialists of yesteryear who continue to want to devour the Essequiba region for their own self-interest in all of Venezuela and all of South America. This vote shows that the Venezuelan people are standing firm in defense of their national interests. What a shame that President Irfan Ali in Guyana, the Guyanese people are a proud people. What a long history of anti-imperialist struggle from President Chetty Jagan to Dr. Walter Rodney, and of course the slave rebellions and in centuries past. I think the Guyanese people can also see that they are being used by the imperialist powers with these divide and conquer strategies, but nationalism can be a very deceptive thing. So popular education and critical information in social media coverage is so important right now at a time that they're trying to use this small, often forgotten Caribbean and South American nation against its much bigger neighbor, Venezuela. But to insinuate that the Venezuelans somehow have a military intention, that they somehow represent a threat to Guyana is ridiculous. This referendum today was more of a diplomatic exercise to show that the Venezuelan people don't trust the International Court of Justice, which may have a highfalutin sounding name, but certainly does not represent justice and does not represent a truly international community. When they say international community, it's a euphemism. that means U.S. interests along with their underlings like the English and the French.
Danny, I'm going to ask you please to hold on a moment because we have to connect with our special set in the headquarters in Caracas, where we'll continue talking about the referendum. But let's quickly go with the set in Caracas. Sorry. Let's now continue talking with Danny Shaw, Professor of International Study at the Public University of New York. We were previously talking with the professor, but we had to cut short the conversation, but now we retake the dialogue with Professor Danny Shaw. Professor, can you hear us?
100% loud and clear from the belly of the beast here in New York City.
Perfect. That sounds like Jose Marti once said in his writings. Danny, continue talking about the Essequibo and the future that it might bring after this referendum, also taking into account the region, because this is not only something that involves Venezuela and Guyana, we could say, but also the region. We have CARICOM, we have all the different regional groups, and how can the future come after today's important referendum?
Well, as the two analysts were laying out, the global class struggle continues to play out across South America and across the Caribbean. We saw a real pivot to the right with Javier Milei, the latest Trump kind of Bolsonaro wannabe, in his victory in Argentina. That came as very tough news. But we've seen big victories in Brazil about a year ago. Peru is going through a very tough time. This week is the 1-year anniversary of the coup in Peru. So the U.S., whether it's a Democratic regime or Republican regime, is going to continue to look for proxy forces that are hostile to the Bolivarians. The Bolivarians in Venezuela have received the most hostile treatment. Why? Because they're the spearhead of South American unity and South American integration. And despite the most cruel sanctions that began in 2014 under the Barack Obama regime, the Venezuelan people have pushed through. They've got rid of this Juan Guaido proxy force that Trump and then Biden had been pushing for so long. So despite the hybrid war, despite the theft of $2 billion in Venezuelan gold by the Bank of England, despite all of the threats and intimidation, we can see that the Bolivarian people continue to stand by their leadership and fight for a unified anti-imperialist South America.
Danny, speaking of the U.S. foreign policy, we have to talk about the Monroe Doctrine, which can be a very clear example here in this case of what is happening. And in this occasion, coincidentally, in Venezuela, there was a forum celebrating the 200 years of resistance against the Monroe Doctrine. How present, how in current times is the Monroe Doctrine still active, if it is, and what is its impact on the region today?
Yeah, today the Monroe Doctrine could be called the Southern Command Doctrine or the Laura Richardson Doctrine or the Biden Doctrine. They continue to have no respect for the economic and resource sovereignty and political, diplomatic, and military sovereignty of the Venezuelan people, of the diverse nations of South America. And when countries like Iran or Russia try to break this hermetically sealed U.S. blockade of Venezuela, the U.S. again responds with aggression surrounding Venezuela, with U.S. gunboats, with 9 U.S. military bases in Colombia, another 11 U.S. military bases in Panama. But because things have shifted to the left in Colombia, and because there is social tumult led by workers and students in Panama, the U.S. intelligence community and the Pentagon and the State Department and the foreign policy establishment are constantly surveilling where their weak points are. And Venezuela has been one of their biggest weak points. That's why in 2015, ExxonMobil, trying to conspire with their Guyanese lackeys, who they're trying to buy off with the promise of handsome profits from the exploitation of the Essequibo, that region, that's why this vote this resounding yes on all five votes today in this national referendum comes as an important countermeasure to the ICJ's decision recently saying that this region belongs to Guyana. But how can it belong to Guyana when all of these borders were drawn up in London, in Paris, and in the colonial metropolises, and not in Caracas, and not in Georgetown, where these agreements have to be hashed out by representatives of the people of those respective nations?
Venezuela stands on its side that the Geneva Agreement is the only path to settle the dispute between Venezuela and Guyana, because they outright reject the 1899 arbitration award that was pretty much negotiated between the States and the British Empire, leaving completely Venezuela off the negotiating table without a say in that moment. Now, seeing the images, Danny, of the celebrations of the people, I need to ask you, is Venezuela an example of how democratic processes should be held in the world? As we saw, the authorities have expressed the security and efficiency of the electoral system, and every time that Venezuela goes to the polls, we see them celebrating as if it was a national party to express their right in the polls of the will of the future they want for the country.
Yeah, contrary to all of the rhetoric and propaganda that we hear in Las Entrañas de la Bestia, to quote Jose Marti, here in the belly of the beast, we don't hear one positive word about Venezuela. Every New York Times headline and Daily News and New York Post headline is completely anti-Venezuelan. It's complete war and propaganda seeking to justify more invasions and occupations of Latin America, as if the 200 plus invasions in the last 200 years, reflecting the arrogance of the Monroe Doctrine, was not enough. But any visitor to Venezuela can feel the people's patriotism, the people's pride in their country, a super rich country that the people want to develop. And that's what this democratic vote, that's what this national referendum was all about. The Venezuelan people, I don't think there's a way for us here in the imperial center to ever imagine what the Venezuelan people have gone through in the past decade since Hugo Chavez's death. Nicolas Maduro has had almost an impossible job keeping this nation of 30 million on its feet, despite the cruelest of blockades. And as part of the U.S. hypocrisy, they deny that there even is a diplomatic, military, and economic blockade and hybrid war on the Venezuelan people. So certainly today is a victory, not just for the humble forces within Venezuela, but for workers across the world.
Danny, seeing the results, seeing everything that we have been talking about and everything that has been analyzed in this special program, I have to ask you, in your opinion, what comes next?
Well, there's a big presidential election coming up next year. The PSUV has decided that their candidate will be Nicolas Maduro, and the opposition continues to be fractionalized in many ways, and they continue to do the bidding of their Washington sponsors. Certainly, D.C. is highly embarrassed and, again, disgraced in the South American nation of 30 million after the Juan Guaido option went down the tubes. Imagine in 2019, Trump, in the most dictatorial, tyrannical, despotic of ways, trying to impose the dictator on the Venezuelan people, thinking they could do the same thing they did during the dirty war to Uruguay and Paraguay and Argentina in the 1970s and in 80s. So those who believe in the Monroe Doctrine will never stop. They'll try everything to divide and conquer the region, precisely because they won't stop drooling over this immense wealth. We know that Venezuela is up there with Saudi Arabia and Iraq and Iran, and we've seen what the U.S. has been willing to do with the bloodbath, with the genocide in Gaza, in Palestine, the invasions of Iraq in 1991 and 2003, a similar type of hybrid war against Iran. So really it's no different, and that's why this vote comes as a victory, not just for Venezuela, but for the 1/3 of the people of the world who wake up every morning under sanctions, very cruel sanctions, that seek to create huge headaches and economic disintegration in all of the blockaded countries from Managua to Tehran to Beijing to Moscow. But this multipolar world is certainly on the horizon, and I think today's vote in Venezuela was a piece of this. And the sooner we have a pluripolar world, as Hugo Chavez laid out some 20 years ago, the sooner that we can find peace for the Palestinian people and peace for all of the blockaded, oppressed nations that I mentioned.
Thank you for your inputs, Danny Show, for this special program on the referendum held in defense of the Guyana Essequiba of Venezuela.
Thank you, teleSUR. Thank you for your coverage.
No, it was always our pleasure to have you here with us. Well,